Dylan,
Hello.
you are
Hello.
live. What is your question today?
Well, I saw that the title said call in and just give your reason for why you believe in God, so I figured I
Yeah.
would just give my reason and just go with that, if that's all right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
first of all, I just want to clarify, just so we understand each other. What God do you believe in?
I believe in the God of the Bible, and as controversial as it might be for some people, I believe it's the same God that's represented in the Quran. So that God.
Okay.
Interesting.
Okay.
So you believe in like the Abrahamic God just being one across like the three major religions?
The God that claims to be the most high of all the spirits, yes. Just one single God. I do not believe that he is Jesus.
Okay. Do
Okay.
you believe that he's
Interesting.
Yahweh?
Yeah, he's known by that name.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
All right. So what convinces you? What led you to believe in this God?
Well, I've had a lot of really interesting experiences in my life, but over the past few years, recently I've gotten really into watching the moon and the stars and the sun and their patterns, and the way that the Bible describes each one of them as having its own individual characteristics, their own individual names, and their own individual paths. And the consistency of the movements of a lot of these things in the sky is just, they're so insanely precise that it solidified my faith to a point of I don't think I'll ever be able to go back to living the type of life I was before learning about a lot of these things. I think I was more of a fake wannabe Christian or believer or whatever title anyone would put on it before. And then after I've seen some of these things, it's just like, you can't really go back.
So can you list some specific examples of something that
All
is
right.
out of
So
the
for
ordinary
instance,
for you?
out of the ordinary, like the consistencies that we do see in the luminaries, like their positions.
Yeah. So what convinced you that this consistency was something supernatural as opposed to something that was just coincidental?
Well, I started to try to look into the trajectory of what they claim our spherical Earth is actually flying at. And I started to kind of map out the positions of specific stars and then the directions in which they come in on the different degrees of horizons, as well as the sun and the moon. The ability for us to predict the positions at which they're going to be in so many years in advance, including the shifts that they take during the seasons, how they're consistently moving, regardless of how you view it, rising in different parts of the east and then setting in different parts of the west. And there's different configurations for where they rise and set in the east and the west for everybody throughout the seasons. Things like that, it's just insane. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with the moon operating on a 19-year cycle. It's called the Metonic cycle. Are y'all familiar with that?
I'm not, but I have a question.
Yeah, no.
So you bring up probability. They're saying that the probability of being able to map these out is low. How did you? Do you have a calculation for the probability? And how did you calculate this out?
When you say, I might not be as smart as a lot of the other people you've had on this channel. So when you say probability, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so the likelihood, it sounded like you're saying that the reason why this is so compelling is that the probability of a person being able to map this out in the past without the knowledge we have today is unlikely. Is that correct?
No, I think that because of their consistency, the paths that they take and the positions, it's been known for as long as we've been finding things written on paper. The Greeks were some of the greatest recorders of the movements and the consistencies of the stars and the moon and the sun.
If I'm understanding this correctly, please tell me. Your position or your reason is that these cycles are so consistent, and they have been since we've been able to find writings, and because people were able to witness that, that's the I don't know what the word is, not the proof, but that's sort of, is that what you're saying? Like, these cycles are consistent, and all the way back since ancient Greek, people have been able to see this and write it down.
Well, I guess it would be a mixture of that, and then researching the things that they claim, and then researching the things that the Bible claims, and then seeing if it's actually consistently true. For instance, he has one star that is, I don't know what the Hebrew name for it would be, but the name that we've given it is Betelgeuse. And when I film that star in 60 frames per second, 1080p, it can cycle through almost 200 or 300 different colors in a matter of 2 seconds. And that is remarkable.
Indicates the existence of God.
There is no matter that we have on this earth that we know of that can burn in those types of light patterns when slowed down. Usually, the things that
it's the spot of the gaps.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So here's my problem with this. No, here's my specific problem with this, because, okay, so let's say I grant that we don't have anything on this earth that can produce those light patterns.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's the light patterns and the colors. The colors, the gases that we have, we can make orange fire, blue fire, green fire. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. But taking this earth as one context, right? There are things that we know that exist in the universe that do not exist on this earth, because this earth has specific parameters and contexts. For example, with gravity,
I agree.
If I drop anything on Earth, I can pretty much predict 100% of the time it's going to fall. But if I take that same object out into outer space and I drop it again 100 times, and 100% of those times it does not fall. So would that mean that because it's not the same on Earth, that means that God exists? Or maybe is there a context difference? Is there a difference in physics, a difference in confounding variables that might explain this difference?
Well, I would first challenge the idea of gravity with, and I'm not denying gravity. I'm just saying carbon dioxide seems to be one of the main issues of a lot of the things we see going wrong in the Earth, right?
Wait, things going wrong is carbon dioxide?
Yeah, is not CO2 emissions one of the highlights of what we talk about on a daily basis? Trying to
for
prevent
greenhouse
global
gases,
cooling and
sure, for temperature issues, but I wouldn't say that carbon dioxide is the cause of most things that go wrong on this earth.
But for the warming, I guess, right?
Sure, I'll grant that.
I'm just, my point would be, well, carbon dioxide is heavier than oxygen, right?
So gravity is not specifically about weight necessarily. Density is going to factor in. So gases especially are going to depend a lot on their density, right?
I would agree. Yeah.
And carbon dioxide is just one thing that we find in the atmosphere, correct?
Yeah, there's multiple things that we find in the atmosphere, but we find an abundance of where we dwell, oxygen and carbon dioxide.
And nitrogen and other compounds. Water is in the air.
Yes, I agree.
So where are we going with this?
Well, I'm specifically just giving my testimony on the luminaries, their positions, their movements, their cycles, the phasing, filming certain luminaries during the day, like Venus yesterday, broad daylight. I'm able to see it phasing. Those types of things. I'm not nearly smart enough to start talking about like gravity equations and all of that stuff.
If I could just ask a quick question, what it sounds like you're saying to me, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is like you've studied these luminary cycles and occurrences, and they are very routine and they follow a pattern, and they have for a very long time, and that you see this pattern written down in places like ancient Greece and then in the Bible. I think that's what you said. And then now, when you're filming things and we don't have this specific color or rate of burning, I don't remember exactly what it was you said, I'm sorry, that this points to God for you. So my question, I guess, is why does that point to God and not simply the fact that we just don't understand something yet? Because in the past, there would have been any number of occurrences that people would not have understood. And so their answer would have been, well, God. And so now I'm curious why we think we suddenly, where we are is the peak of knowledge. And if we don't understand something now, it must be a deity.
Well, as time progresses, our technology continues to get better and better. And just about 10 years ago, someone like me definitely would not have been able to just go out and buy the type of technology off the Best Buy shelf as I am today. That's the only way we're able to get so close to seeing those things, because the things that we can film with our cameras now are vastly different than the technology is vastly different than what it was before. So if they weren't able to use the technologies they had back then, you think about the technologies we have now, especially instantaneous communication and data transfer. I mean, optics is just something that comes along with all of those evolutions, I believe.
Sure, but that doesn't address the question of the fact that in 10 years, we'll know more than we do now. And so what if we discover this type of matter or this ability to burn in 10 years and we have a scientific answer for it? It doesn't matter the technology that we have, except for that it showed us the answer. So now, in 10 years, if we are able to explain this, then where does that leave your belief in God?
Well, I definitely don't know what that matter is. I definitely do not know the source of the light. I only can speak on the characteristics of the lights and the consistencies in their movements and their behaviors. I have no idea what it is. I don't claim to know what it is because, like I told you guys, I'm not that smart. But when I see consistency, I believe that is something that we should pay attention to, because we don't really ever talk about that. Another anomaly that we don't ever talk about is the craters on the moon. Were either of y'all aware that they inflate and deflate, or appear to, I guess I would say?
I'd like to start with one where we see a lot of consistency. In fact, that's the scientific method.
Yes, ma'am.
Test and repeat.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I wrong, Ben?
No, you're correct.
I don't think you're wrong.
Consistency is something that so what would, if something is consistent, how do we make the leap from I found something consistent to a God did it? Do you think maybe if we were to break this down, we'd need to, like, do you think that there's a possibility that anything else could cause it?
Well, I just gave you an example of the craters on the moon. The craters on the moon, and I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out and then respond. They inflate or fill themselves according to the phases, and as the moon, I guess, as it gets light, I don't know how it works, these craters seem to fill up as it gets to a full point. They lose all sorts of depth. They lose all sorts of. I apologize. Go ahead.
Inflate with what exactly?
I don't know.
And how does a crater well, how can a crater inflate if a crater is an indentation? What is there to fill?
You can monitor the shadows, and you can also see the depth through the optics.
So does the crater get bigger, or what do you mean by inflate? How do you inflate a crater?
So it seems as if they have some sort of depth to them, right? They're convex, or no, they're concave. And then as the light gets further away from them, they become flush with the surface. I don't know how it does it, but it does it consistently. And
so like an illusion, or do you think that it actually fills in, like physically fills in when the light is in a different place?
Well, what I've recorded is that it literally just fills in.
So how would you determine that this was not
at a distance?
How did you determine that this was not an illusion?
I'm not sure. Like, I don't know if it's an illusion. If it's this consistent, is it an illusion though? I mean, like,
well, if you're witnessing this every time, your eyes are the ones witnessing this every time, correct? You're not borrowing somebody else's eyes.
No,
yes, so it's recorded, but you are perceiving this image, right? You're perceiving the image of it filling in, correct?
Yeah, we can only see one face of the moon at all times, so I can't make a determination on if it's, the dimension of the rest of the object. We perfectly only see one side.
So how could we test this? Let's say I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that this crater fills over or inflates in any way. And you say that you've seen this. What could you do to demonstrate to me that it does?
The only thing I would be able to do is just show you the recordings and show you what we do on the optics and the telescopes and the cameras.
So then if you showed me this recording, how would you determine whether or not this was an optical illusion?
I would need you to define the optical illusion, because I'm only speaking on the consistencies. I don't know what it is. I don't know how.
So again, your eyes are looking at this video that you captured. So regardless of what actually happened in that recording, you can only perceive this with your own brain. You cannot necessarily understand what anyone else is seeing. You are the only one seeing this, correct? So even if you are looking at this multiple times, you are still perceiving it with your brain. So there is a perception that needs to occur. You need to see this information and your brain needs to process it. And then this processing can be funny because our brain fills in patterns even when they aren't there. These are heuristics. Have you ever seen like certain logos on businesses? There's my favorite example is there's 9 dots and there's a cube. If you look really hard, there's a cube formed out of open points in the dots. So the cube actually isn't there. The cube isn't there, but your brain connected the blank spaces together and made a complete picture out of it. So that's what I'm saying is you'd need to find a way to rule out the fact that your brain could have made a pattern where there wasn't one. Your brain could have thought this filled in, because that's what I understand. That's what I see in other aspects of reality. I've seen this happen before. This is what I'm seeing here. So how could we determine that that's... Go ahead.
Well, you can obviously see the geography on the moon. I mean, there's it looks like mountains and hills and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's very obvious. It's all sorts of elevations, that's not hard to see.
Sure, you can see it, but you know that our perception changes with distance of the object, with lighting of the object. Have you seen
the distances don't change, and the only light that changes is according to its phase. That's what
Well,
I'm
the
saying.
moon
Is
is
these
on an
phasers, they're
axis and it
Terminator
rotates,
lines.
and so it certainly will have different lighting as it rotates, and it will get the part you're looking at as it rotates is going to get further away.
No, it doesn't, because we only see one side of the moon. Are you aware of that? I'm not sure. I'm not trying to be asinine, and I'm not trying to be a smartass. I'm not. I truly don't know if you're aware of that.
Even if lighting is the only thing, let's say lighting is the only thing that changes. Could lighting impact your perception of what you're looking at?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at a mountain and the mountain goes flat, you can try to explain it in a lot of different ways. The answer to your question would be yes. Lighting could always impact your perception. Okay,
cool. So how is this not the case with your example? How do we exclude that and now jump to it's supernatural?
I'm not saying it's supernatural. I'm just telling you what it does and the way it does it consistently and how it does it. And I find it very interesting that we aren't being told that the moon actually, the geography changes itself throughout the phasing. I find that highly interesting.
It would be interesting to see some evidence that this happens, such as...
Sure, so let's even say that that's true. Let's say that the geography does change.
Okay.
What then says Yahweh? Because that is a big leap.
I don't know why it changes, and it changes back, and it changes, and then it changes back, and then it changes the course, and then it changes back. You know, they have different courses that they take in the sky, and they specifically travel through certain constellations at different times and different seasons. And even if you look at the North Star, you know, everybody knows the North Star never moves. It has a very, very, very small circle that it takes, right?
This is not really answering the question,
the point is, I apologize.
No apologies necessary. It's just, I understand what you're saying about patterns and how this, maybe we don't have an explanation, or you don't have an explanation, or whatever it looks like. But just because we don't understand something doesn't mean we can attribute it to a God. And if we are going to attribute it to a God, why is it your specific God?
The only reason I attribute it to him is because he's the only one that takes claim of making those positions and patterns and movements. He's the only God that makes the claim that he is the one who actually drew all the pictures for us to be able to watch, to see his glory. He's the only one that lays claim to fashioning Orion's belt and giving us a story to always be able to read in the sky. Even if they take away the scriptures on the ground, we're always able to read it in the sky. That's the only reason I attribute it to him. Like I said, I'm not a science genius or anything.
I would be very interested, and I mean this with complete sincerity, to see these verses that lay this out so succinctly and clearly. I've read the Bible a lot, and I know the heavens will declare the glory of God, and yeah, I know those ones. But I'm interested in seeing, if you have them, which verses point out exactly all these cycles that you're talking about in the detail with which you're talking about them.
Sure. I mean, you want to talk about what do we want to talk about? The stars or the moon? Are you guys familiar with the book of Enoch or the book of Jubilees?
Interesting. Okay, so you're going outside of biblical canon here.
Well, in my culture, canon would be considered blasphemy. There's no man that can determine what is holy and what is not holy. Only truth determines what is holy and what is not holy.
If I ask what tradition that is?
I mean, like I told you, I was a thief and a lot of bad things a few years ago, and then I looked into this, and suddenly I'm a Bible thumping, whatever you want to call me. You know what I'm saying?
No, nothing like that. But you said your culture, and I'm just curious, like what if it's a certain tradition, or what your culture is that determines that or that states that truth is holy.
I mean,
okay.
I mean, you have to understand, like, my life is not like everybody else's. I was adopted, So I'm like a mutt. I've been in a lot of different, societies.
We're just trying to figure out what
like
your
the
perspective
framework,
is.
that's all.
And
I guess.
yeah, we're just trying to organize everything.
Yeah. So I am not trying to be judgmental at all. I'm just trying to get a general framework. So like I grew up evangelical, so we have the Bible, and that's the Bible, right? And I don't still believe that, obviously. But of course, there are other traditions that include other books, like you mentioned, Enoch, Jubilee. So I'm just trying to get a better sort of feel for
why I
framework that you're in.
Well,
yeah.
The reason I say that is because it's God's culture. God has a behavior and expectations. And when you start to actually walk out those behaviors and expectations, it becomes your culture. And in our culture, our set-apart culture, there is no man of flesh that can lay claim to knowing anything outside of what the Most High God has allowed us to know. So there's no man that can decide or decipher whether something is to be official or unofficial. It has to be determined by the Spirit, and the Spirit alone.
Sure. So then
how do you determine?
Have a different idea?
How do you determine the Spirit?
I guess my question is, if no man is able to determine what is holy or what is God's word, only the Spirit can do that. And does that mean that every man has a different interpretation of what is holy?
Well, I would say that holy would be set apart. So the truth. So
sure, but how do you determine the truth?
Have you ever heard of the rice experiment?
No.
It's an experiment where you cook a nice big old pot of rice. You take 3 jars, and then you put the rice in each one of the jars, and you put hate on one, neutral on another, and good, positive vibes on the last one. Does any of this ring a bell?
It sounds like something very similar that I've heard in other studies that have been not demonstrated to be scientifically valid.
Yeah, it sounds like pseudoscience.
Well, the person who actually did it, he was a Japanese guy or something. It was peer reviewed, and I'm pretty sure it's validated. But is the practice of exposing matter to different frequencies, and what gets proven is that intention. And say, like, for instance, with this rice experiment, if you'll allow me to elaborate, you spend a dedicated time of 5 minutes a day with the hate jar, separate from the other jars, giving it ill intent, or even just holding it and feeling ill intent for the jar. And
so
then
what happens to the rice?
Right back
what happens to the rice with each of the jars? Sum it up pretty quickly, because we're running low on time. So
I apologize.
We'll probably address this quickly,
sorry,
and then we'll
take up all of your time.
Oh no, we can finish up this conversation. I just don't want to.
The hate jar rots after about. It depends on how long you do the experiment, but the longer you do it, the more mind-blowing the results are. You can do this with rice. You could do it with flowers. You can do it with.
So here's the thing: How do you isolate variables in this? We have to have controls, right? So if the only thing that's different is the intent, what other confounding variables would we have had to isolate?
Sorry, I just quickly Google checked it, and this experiment has been debunked many times over. But I'll let Ben take it away with the variables. I just wanted to toss that out there.
Well, you could, because you could not replicate something like this and have it consistently show the same results over and over unless there are variables that you are not isolating, such as the contents of the jar. If you sterilized one jar and didn't sterilize another one, bacteria content would make a difference. Atmosphere could make a difference. Type of rice could make a difference. Like, there are lots of things that need to be isolated with these kinds of studies. Even if you did a study one time and got a difference, you need to demonstrate that the difference was significant statistically and that it wasn't coincidental. So something that we have to do in every single study is, what is the probability that my result was not the result of a coincidence? And that is data that I would need to see. And that's where a lot of people get lost, I think, in studies, because they say there's a difference. This group had a different result than this one. that might not mean anything unless we can demonstrate that there is a reason why there was a difference and that you could replicate that difference over and over and over again. So I'd encourage you, and I think we're probably going to end it here because we've gone on a whole lot of different topics and we're at the end of the show. But I encourage you, I encourage you. I want you to do a little bit of homework if you can for me. I want you to look at what determines a causal relationship. Look into how we determine causality and call back in a different week. Because this was, I think you were a very kind person to talk to. I think we had some good discussion. And I'm sure we're going to keep disagreeing on this, but if you'd like to call back next week, I don't know who's going to be on, but I'm sure they'd love to go into more depth on this with you.
I really appreciate both of your time, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your evening.